So I just wanted to briefly go over 25 ride ideas I had for Star Wars or in relation to Disneyland. So starting with the first one, the immediate ride that would come to mind is recreating the pod race scene from The Phantom Menace. I guess the closest thing I would really kind of relate this to is maybe something like Cars, where you're recreating that fake desert scene, but the ride is a full, real, immersive ride. Another big ride that would come to mind is something with an X-Wing to really make you feel like you're flying in an X-Wing. I think in terms of what's been done already, I really liked the Space Mountain ride when it was themed directly to Star Wars, because there was a few instances in terms of the video or images that they would show around you that really made you feel like you were in the middle of a space battle. So I think this in the form of an X-Wing could be something that's really neat. And it could maybe just be as simple as taking something like Space Mountain and using it as a guide, but it would be some sort of an enclosed cart similar to the design of the X-Wing, but pretty much everything else could really recreate all of that imagery. Another more recent idea I think would be on one of the arguably biggest scenes of Star Wars recently in the season 2 finale of The Mandalorian, where Luke came to rescue the crew along with Grogu. And I think how this could look pretty similar to Rise of the Resistance, which I think is a really great ride, but maybe something that's inside and you're kind of riding along a cart, and maybe you encountered some of the Dark Troopers or Luke's animatronics defeating all of them, and then you have Grogu along with Din Djarin and Bo-Katan and all of their animatronics off to the side. I think that could be a really neat interactive ride that would make you feel like you're in the middle of the scene. Another more recent example that I think was one of the better scenes in the Book of Boba Fett was Mando taking off in his Naboo starfighter, because we do know that the Razor Crest was destroyed. I think this pretty similar to the pod racing idea if you wanted to go with a more modern Star Wars example. I think if you could possibly somehow recreate the test flight sequence that Din goes through during this time, that pretty much mirrors the route of the pod racing scene from The Phantom Menace, I think that could be a great source material guide for a ride as well. Another big one, just going in no particular order, I think another big iconic scene is the Duel of Fates battle from The Phantom Menace, and similar to the Luke and Mando idea and what's been done in Rise of the Resistance, I think a similar inside cart ride where you're really going through that final battle and maybe you're seeing a lot of the initial conflicts with blasters, maybe Anakin's off to the side trying to board one of the ships, but really I think the big thing would be going through the area where Maul is fighting both Qui-Gon and Kenobi. I also would think the same idea could be applied to something like Empire Strikes Back. Probably one of the biggest scenes in Star Wars would be the Luke, I am your father moment. So I think kind of riding through that. Another one just in terms of the concept, but it maybe could be applied for a number of planets in Star Wars, would be the land speeders that you have. I think probably the most common instance of this would be the ones that you see on Tatooine. So maybe just a fake desert space to really mimic what the dynamic of Tatooine would be like. And it's just a little bit of a cruise between a land speeder and maybe you go past the home where Luke grew up. I think that could be another great exterior ride option here. Similar to the idea of a land speeder, I think what the scout troopers use, which is almost like a hovering motorcycle, creating some sort of a ride where you're kind of just in the position of what that would be like, I think would be really neat. And I think the closest thing you could really compare it to is something like the Tron ride in Walt Disney World. And then maybe this isn't exactly classified for a ride, and I think this would definitely be pretty difficult to build, but even if you didn't have the exact movement, I really think that the Coruscant political chamber is one of the really neat designs in Star Wars. So maybe if you had some sort of a Coruscant land, again, this is really just hypothetical. You might not nearly have the space or the opportunity to build something like this, but I think really creating a lot of those really grand buildings and super sci-fi designs, like in the political chambers. That could be a great attraction, even if it wasn't really a ride, or maybe it could just be something you see as part of another ride, but you can't really walk or interact through it. Another great one from the prequels, I think Mustafar would be a really neat planet to make you feel like you're immersed in. I think something with either the Battle of the Heroes ending of Revenge of the Sith, maybe if you're traveling through that, or maybe if it was a little bit after in terms of Vader's castle being built there. And maybe you're kind of just riding through a lava planet and you're going through the castle and you maybe see Vader in his Bacta tank as part of the animatronics for the ride, or maybe something kind of similar to the Vader VR game on Mustafar. I think that could be great source material potential there. Looking to Attack of the Clones, I think another great Coruscant idea would be somehow recreating the chase sequence between Kenobi and Anakin with the assassin. That probably would be pretty hard to do. But I think really if you were able to somehow create a Coruscant ride where it really felt like you were flying in one of the speeders through all of that air traffic, I think that could just be an absolute blast. Another Attack of the Clones option I think could be really creating the final battle at the end, and maybe that's something you're going through, or maybe you're riding through a similar cart like Anakin and Padme ride in to enter the Battle of Geonosis. I think recreating that environment and kind of recreating a smaller version of what looks to be inspired by a Coliseum could be a great immersive ride that really felt like you're in the middle of a Clone Wars battle. Another really famous planet from Star Wars that I think would be neat to see brought to life would be Hoth, if you would somehow create some sort of a snow planet. I think something similar to Matterhorn could be a great option here. Another example from Attack of the Clones I think would be neat is something with Camino. I think that's one of the more interesting destinations of that movie, and I think if it was maybe just some sort of an interior ride similar to Rise of the Resistance, where you're seeing a lot of the different clones, and maybe you have a Jango Fett cameo with some sort of an animatronic, and of course Boba Fett with him. I think that could be great, and maybe this is in the middle of the battle between Kenobi and Jango Fett. Something that's really a little bit outside of the ordinary here. I don't know if this would really be a specific ride, or maybe could be a part of some of these other rides, but I think probably the closest thing would be the X-Wing idea with Space Mountain, but I think something that really made you feel like you were entering hyperspace would be neat. Maybe if this was some sort of a ship and you had the hyperspace effect, it wouldn't have to be that long, but maybe the ride could then finish outside again and help you get to a different side of the park, so it could really make you feel like you're traveling between planets. But going back to the prequels or Coruscant, in addition to the political area, I think recreating the Jedi Chamber would be extremely fascinating. Maybe if this was just a part of a ride that you went through and you had a lot of the animatronics of all the Jedi sitting there in their meetings, and you had some sort of a digital backdrop overlooking the cityscape in Coruscant, I think that would just be so fascinating. I think even outside a ride, if this was just a area of the park that was built in, and maybe you had meet and greets with some of the different Jedi in this, I think that could be great and a great photo opportunity, because I think that would definitely be a fan favorite destination. That would probably be one of the easier sets to build based on the movie. And going back to the X-Wing idea, I think another neat scene is the opening of Revenge of the Sith. I think a lot of that flight sequence, similar to Space Mountain, could be another option or an alternative to an X-Wing ride. Or you could even do a separate one doing the events of Revenge of the Sith right after that in terms of invading Grievous's ship. Again, I'm envisioning an interior style ride, but you're encountering Anakin fighting Dooku on one end and Grievous in his droids and some sort of an animatronic off to the side that you're passing through. And then also kind of similar to the Empire Strikes Back idea, I think some sort of a big building that really encompassed the Death Star would be a neat aesthetic appearance from the outside. And maybe this is a certain part of the park or just the exterior of the building, but I think seeing that from a distance or close up would be something really neat here as well. Another big popular destination that I think would be neat seeing brought to life would be Jabba's palace. This could be from a number of different timelines or events in Star Wars. And maybe again, if there was a section of Tatooine, I think this could be a great option. Another really neat destination I think would be Endor. I think just anything in terms of getting some Ewok animatronics could be great. It could be the whole battle, could really make you feel like you're traveling through the middle of that. Or I think an even better option would be something where you're going through the ending of Return of the Jedi with a lot of the victory celebration. Even if it was just a slow ride and you're traveling through some sort of an animatronic with a lot of the Ewoks and everyone dancing with the music and certain sound effects to really give you the Endor experience, I think that could be a really cheerful option here. Another classic one, I don't know if this would necessarily be a ride or maybe just a lounge or dining area, but I really think you have to do something to really create the effect of Cloud City. I think that's definitely one of the more unique designs for the original movies or just in Star Wars in general. I think there would definitely be enough source material to make you feel like you're traveling through a lot of those big scenes, or it could just be a simple aesthetic location where you're able to walk through in a section of the park. But shifting back into some of the more modern options for recent Star Wars projects, I think you obviously have to do something with the Mandalorian. And even though the Razor Crest did get destroyed, I still think that is the iconic Mandalorian ship. So I think that could be a neat option, kind of similar to the Millennium Falcon. Maybe some sort of a live replica of the Razor Crest would be a really great part to walk through. In terms of Rogue One, I think the ending scene with Vader is one of the great recent additions that you've gotten for Star Wars. I think creating that in some shape or form for a ride could be really neat, where you're part of the Resistance and you're trying to escape. Maybe kind of similar to Kylo Ren coming after you in Rise of the Resistance, but I think seeing Vader in that fashion could really be the iconic Star Wars experience. And then it could, of course, end by you, along with the rebellion, escaping and giving the plans to Leia. And then for the last one, I think something just in the form of Cal Kestis, which is a little bit of a deviation, but I think whether it's Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor, I think this could be a neat alternative. And I also think it would be really neat to see this being brought to life. But these are just some ideas that I think would be really neat to experience. But feel free to let me know your thoughts on these, and I'll see you later.